There is a rule in radio astronomy, a simple one, practical, universally understood. When you detect something you cannot explain, you look for the explanation closest to home first. Equipment error, solar interference, a military transmission on a restricted frequency, a satellite you weren't told about. You exhaust every terrestrial possibility before you allow yourself to consider anything else. In 2003, a team of researchers at a radio telescope array in rural Australia detected a signal. They spent 6 weeks looking for the explanation closest to home. They found nothing. What they found instead was something that should not have been possible. And then, one by one, they stopped talking about it. The Murchison region of Western Australia is one of the most radio-quiet places on Earth. No major cities, no dense industry, strict government controls on electromagnetic emissions going back decades. It is, by design, one of the cleanest places in the world to listen to the sky, which is precisely why the array was built there. The facility operated under a joint research agreement between 2 universities, one Australian, one American. It was not a famous installation. It was not particularly well funded. It was the kind of place that produced careful, methodical science that almost no one outside the field would ever read. The team that staffed it in 2003 consisted of 6 people. Lead researcher, Dr. Mara Solano, astrophysicist, 39 years old, 14 years in radio astronomy. By every account, meticulous, skeptical, and constitutionally allergic to overstatement. She was not someone who saw things that weren't there. Her team ran continuous sky surveys, mapping known sources, cataloging emissions, building baseline data for longer-term studies. Routine work, important but quiet. On the 14th of March, 2003, the routine ended. At approximately 2:17 in the morning local time, the array's automated detection system flagged an incoming signal, narrowband, structured, originating from a fixed point in the sky. Dr. Solano was asleep in the facility's on-site quarters when the alert came through. She was at her console within 4 minutes. What she saw on that readout, she would describe only once, publicly, years later. She said it was the most organized thing she had ever seen come out of the sky. The signal had a cycle. Not a pulse, not a burst, a cycle. 19.3 hours. Precise, unwavering. Every 19.3 hours, the signal would complete one full pattern and begin again, identical in every measurable way to the previous iteration. In radio astronomy, repetition is not unusual. Pulsars repeat. Rotating neutron stars emit regular pulses that can look, superficially, like structured signals. When pulsars were first discovered in 1967, the researchers who found them briefly, and only half-jokingly, labeled the source LGM-1. LGM stood for Little Green Men. They were wrong, of course. It was a pulsar. But signal NX-7 was not a pulsar. Pulsars repeat on timescales of milliseconds to seconds, occasionally minutes. 19.3 hours is not a pulsar timescale. It does not correspond to any known natural astrophysical phenomenon that produces repeating narrowband radio emissions. Dr. Solano knew this within the first 48 hours. She began the process of elimination systematically. Equipment calibration, checked and rechecked. Terrestrial interference, ruled out through cross-referencing with 2 other facilities operating simultaneously that night. Satellite emissions. Every known satellite in the relevant orbital path was accounted for. Military frequencies. The team filed a quiet inquiry through official channels. The response came back clean. Nothing on the books matched what they were seeing. The signal continued. 19.3 hours. Complete. Begin again. By the end of the second week, Dr. Solano had done something she would later describe as the hardest professional decision of her career. She contacted 2 colleagues at separate institutions, not publicly, not through official channels, privately, by phone. She asked them to look at the raw data. Both of them agreed immediately. The signal continued for 6 weeks in total. 19.3 hours, complete. Begin again. Then, on the 43rd day of detection, it stopped. Not gradually, not with degradation or signal drop. It simply ceased. Mid-cycle, 11.7 hours into what would have been its 44th complete pattern. Dr. Solano noted the exact time of termination in her log. She waited 48 hours for it to resume. It did not. She waited another week. Nothing. The sky at those coordinates was silent, exactly as it had been before March 14th, exactly as every other survey of that region had recorded, as if the signal had never been there. Dr. Solano filed an internal report with her facility. The report was reviewed by the Joint University Oversight Committee. The committee's response, documented in a brief administrative memo, was that the signal was most likely a previously uncatalogued natural source and that further investigation would require additional funding that was not currently available. The case was not closed. It was simply set aside. Dr. Solano did not accept that. Over the following 18 months, she continued her own analysis, working outside her official duties, spending evenings and weekends with the raw data, running it through every analytical framework she could access. And in that process, she found something that had not been visible in the initial detection, something she had missed because in the beginning, she had been looking at the signal the way scientists are trained to look at signals, as a thing being transmitted. She had not considered the possibility that it might also be receiving. Here is what she found. The 19.3-hour cycle was not perfectly consistent. In 43 repetitions of the pattern, there were only four, instances where the cycle length deviated from 19.3 hours by a measurable margin. The deviations were small, fractions of a second, within the range that could be attributed to instrument sensitivity, except they weren't random. Each of the 4 deviations occurred within a specific window, a window that corresponded, in each case, to a period when the array's own transmission systems had been active. The array transmitted routine calibration pulses, standard procedure, low power, short duration, logged automatically. Each time the array transmitted, the signal paused, not significantly, not in a way that would have been obvious without the kind of obsessive granular analysis Dr. Solano had spent 18 months conducting, but measurably, consistently. 4 transmissions, 4 pauses. Whatever was sending signal NX-7 was also listening. Dr. Solano sat with that finding for a long time before she told anyone. She went back through the data 16 times. She rechecked the calibration transmission logs against the signal deviation timestamps manually, by hand, on paper, to eliminate any possibility of a software error introducing a false correlation. The correlation held, every time. She then did something that, by her own later admission, she was never entirely sure was the right decision. She transmitted, deliberately, a single pulse, low power, directed at the coordinates of origin. The sky had been silent for 11 months at that point. The signal had not returned. She told herself it was a controlled test, an experiment, the kind of thing any rigorous scientist would do to stress test a hypothesis. She transmitted at 11:46 in the evening on a Thursday in February 2005. For 7 hours, nothing. And then, at 6:52 the following morning, signal NX-7 returned. One single cycle, 19.3 hours, complete. And then silence again, forever. Dr. Solano documented everything. She wrote it up in full, the original detection, the colleague responses, the deviation analysis, the deliberate transmission, the return signal. She submitted it to 2 academic journals. Both rejected it without peer review. The stated reason, in both cases, was insufficient evidence for the claims being made. She retired from academic research 14 months later at the age of 42. In a single recorded interview given in 2009, the only time she ever discussed NX-7 publicly, she said only this: We were not supposed to hear that, and I think whatever sent it knows we did. There are several frameworks through which signal NX-7 can be interpreted. The first is instrumental artifact. The signal was a previously unidentified form of interference, generated by an unknown terrestrial or orbital source that coincidentally mimicked the characteristics of a structured transmission. The apparent deviation correlation with the array's own calibration pulses was a statistical artifact, a pattern that human minds, trained to find patterns, imposed on noise. This is the most scientifically defensible position. It is also the one that requires you to accept that two of the most qualified people Dr. Solano could have sent the data to both chose silence over publication of a natural explanation. Scientists do not go quiet when they find boring answers. The second framework is undisclosed human origin. A classified program, military, governmental, or otherwise, was conducting radio transmissions from an unknown platform in 2003. The signal's unusual characteristics were a function of technology that doesn't appear in the public record. Dr. Vogt's warning to "be careful who sees this" was not fear of the unknown. It was recognition of something known to very few. This framework is uncomfortable but not impossible. Classified satellite programs have historically produced signals that confused civilian researchers. Some of those programs have never been publicly acknowledged. But this framework struggles with one detail: the return signal. If NX-7 was a classified transmission from a known human source, why did it respond to Dr. Solano's deliberate pulse 11 months after going silent? Classified programs don't typically answer questions. The third framework is the one that the data, considered in full, most directly implies, even though Dr. Solano herself never stated it outright in her interview. The signal originated from a source beyond Earth. The 19.3-hour cycle corresponds to no known natural astrophysical phenomenon. The signal was structured, not in the way that natural sources are structured by physics, but in the way that communication is structured by intent. The four deviations correlated precisely with the array's own transmissions, suggesting active monitoring of the same frequencies the array used. And when a deliberate transmission was sent toward the point of origin, something answered. Once, as if to confirm, and then never again. Some researchers who have looked at this case, none of whom have published, describe that single return signal as the most unsettling detail of all. Not because it suggests contact, but because of what came after it. Nothing. As if whatever sent it had gotten what it needed and moved on. Dr. Mara Solano is 61 years old. She does not work in radio astronomy anymore. She does not give interviews. The raw data from the 6-week NX-7 detection period exists, according to Dr. Solano's own account, in a single archived drive held at the original facility. Whether it has been accessed, copied, or reviewed by anyone since her departure is not known. Dr. James Okafor retired from his position in the Netherlands in 2008. He has not published since 2004. Dr. Ingrid Vogt continues to work in theoretical astrophysics. She has never referenced signal NX-7 in any published paper. In 2019, a graduate student asked her directly about it at a conference in Oslo. She left the session without responding. The Murchison array continues to operate. It has been significantly expanded and upgraded since 2003 and is now part of one of the most sophisticated radio telescope networks in the world. In all the surveys conducted since, signal NX-7 has not returned. There is a version of this story where everything has a simple explanation: interference, coincidence, a scientist under professional strain who found patterns that weren't there, two colleagues who stayed quiet because silence is easier than saying, "I don't know." That version is possible. But there is another version, in which a signal traveled an unknowable distance to reach a small array in a quiet desert, in which it broadcast, patiently on a 19.3-hour cycle for 43 repetitions and listened carefully to everything the array did in response, in which it waited 11 months after going silent. And when one woman, alone at her console at 11:46 on a Thursday night, pointed her instruments at the coordinates and transmitted, it heard her, it answered, and it decided that was enough. We don't know what NX-7 was. We don't know where it came from. We don't know what it was looking for. What we know is this: it found something, and we were the ones who told it where to look.